It should be recording now, Colin.
Excellent. Thanks, Nina. Is everyone able to see the slides on the screen?
Yes.
I'll take that silence as a yes. Okay, great. So as I said, welcome to the Hydrogen Power Study Task Force third working group meeting for the Uses Working Group. Thanks everyone for joining. I know Thanksgiving is right around the corner and appreciate you spending your time with us today. Quick overview of the meeting logistics. Please mute your microphone if you're not speaking to avoid background noise. If you'd like to voice a comment or question, feel free to use the chat box or raise your hand and we can call on you to unmute and speak up. Again, this meeting will be recorded, so please, if you're talking, state your name for the record before addressing your comments. In quick overview of the agenda, we'll go through welcome and introductions again, just so everyone is aware of who's on the call. Then we'll spend 10 minutes to review the hydrogen end use evaluation and prioritization framework that was presented in the last task force. Then to do a quick overview of some preliminary analysis coming out of our assessment of potential hydrogen demand in Connecticut. And finally, have about 20 minutes for discussion next steps. And I'm sure there'll be, I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to vocalize their feedback. Quick reminder of strategy's role. This has been presented a couple of other presentations, so I won't go through it in detail, but just as a quick reminder. And then we'll move to introductions. So my colleague Nina will call out people in the order in which they're on the team call, or in which they appear in the list of participants on the team call. And when you're called on, please share your name, your title, and the organization that you're representing.
All right, Andrea.
Hi, this is Andrea Labowie. I'm a senior engineer with Toyota.
Sorry about that. Ben.
Hi, this is Ben Butterworth with Acadia Center.
Enrique.
Hi, good afternoon. Enrique Bosch, Head of Innovation at Avangrid.
Diganto.
Hey guys, Diganto Chatterjee, Vice President, System Planning at Eversource.
Joel.
Joe Reinbold here, Director, CCAT.
Jordan.
Jordan Ahern, Strategen.
Alan.
Just a member of the public.
Lydia.
Hi everyone, Lydia Rupert from the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection.
Sarah.
Sarah Harari with the Connecticut Green Bank.
Shannon.
Hi everyone, Shannon Lawn. I'm the Connecticut State Director for Conservation Law Foundation.
And then Becca.
Hi all, Becca Treach, Senior Policy Advisor, Connecticut Deep.
All right, and then like Colin said, I'm Nina, I'm with Strategen. And if there's anyone else that I missed, feel free to speak up now. All right, I think you're good to go, Colin.
Excellent, thanks, Nina. So as a reminder, my name is Colin Smith. I'm a senior consultant at Strategen. Also as a reminder, and I think that this was identified through their introductions, some of their introductions, but Joel Reinbold and Diganto Chatterjee are the co-chairs of this working group and have been engaging throughout this process to help facilitate a number of the meetings and analysis that you'll see today. Quick overview of where we are in sort of the schedule for working group meetings. We're currently in November. That's the third set of working group meetings, third out of 4. The next working group meeting will be a joint meeting between the Uses and Sources working group, and that'll be December 20th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. All right, now moving into some of the main content of the presentation, I wanted to spend a bit of time discussing the end use prioritization that was presented in the last task force in more detail, because I know that that was something that we discussed significantly at past working group meeting and did not necessarily have as much time in the task force meeting, given all the different agenda items that were present at that meeting to provide as much of a detailed discussion on that particular element. And so I wanted to give a chance to continue to do that here in this meeting. This is a slide that you should recognize from the task force meeting. It basically lays out the different priority buckets, the sort of underlying a rationale for how they're structured and what end uses fall within each bucket, as well as an example of the proposed end uses for those particular buckets. I won't go into too much detail on this particular slide because I've prepared a number of other slides that kind of break out each of these buckets and provide more detail on how they're structured and what's inside them. So first, I want to talk about the highest priority use case. The end uses that are identified as highest priority use case for additional investigation. So just taking a step back, a reminder to everyone, based on feedback from past working groups, we opted to create a prioritization framework that looks specifically at which end uses would be the priorities for additional investigation. And so we're really looking at which end uses based on the existing literature and information that we have access to, do we see as being maybe the most valuable opportunities for additional consideration by policy working group and by the legislature. This is not necessarily a grouping of which end uses should and should not use hydrogen, but we're trying to make sure that we're focusing some of the attention of the different of the legislature and the policymakers involved on the end uses that are some of the potentially the most valuable for the legislature to look at. And so from that perspective, the end uses that fall into the highest priority buckets are kind of there for two reasons. First, there are end uses that are very likely to use hydrogen, either because alternative routes of decarbonization are kind of economically or technically infeasible, or the underlying economics in these end uses are driving hydrogen use in these sectors today, and so it's important for the legislature to prepare for hydrogen use in these sectors. These include things like aviation, marine shipping, critical facilities with long backup power needs of 24 hours or more, and material handling equipment like forklifts with long shifts and limited downtime. In addition, a number of end uses here are placed in this bucket due to the ability for hydrogen use in these sectors to scale significantly given the size of the industry. This would drive significant societal benefits, both in terms of greenhouse gas reduction, pollution reduction, workforce development opportunities. And these are sectors where you not only get that opportunity to scale benefits, but where hydrogen is a particularly strong economic option compared to other decarbonization tools like electrification. And so some of the end uses that fall into this bucket include long-haul trucking, power generation or long-duration storage, and electric grids with high penetration of renewables, and then high-heat industrial processes. So based on some stakeholder feedback, we also recognize that it's important to note the level of policy engagement, the type of policy engagement that would be required to address some of these end uses, specifically identifying which end uses could be addressed with state-specific policy support, so which the Connecticut legislature could kind of address potentially directly through internal state-specific legislation, as well as end uses that would likely require regional or international cooperation. A number of the most challenging but promising end uses for hydrogen are transportation applications that might require multi-state development of multi-state infrastructure to make them feasible. And this type of cooperation is not impossible. It's been done and developed by other states. And there's no reason to think that Connecticut wouldn't be able to do the same, especially considering its position in the regional Northeast hydrogen hub. However, it's relevant to call out which end uses may require such cooperation and coordination in order to better focus policy recommendations specific to those end uses. And so you can see here in this identification system, marine shipping and long-haul trucking are the two end uses where regional international cooperation would likely be most important and necessary in order to tackle these particular end uses. So these end uses, given their the very promising economics for hydrogen end uses and the importance of solving them in order to address Connecticut's climate and economic goals, these are opportunities where there would be a potential role for directed policy support and market development efforts to allow the development of a hydrogen industry within these sectors.
Hey, Colin, just very quick on the previous slide. Is there a potential benefit to separating regional from interregional? And the only reason I'm saying that is because I don't know if it's true, but for marine shipping, if we're talking about a hydrogen use case for marine shipping for actually powering these ships, I don't know if we need interregional cooperation if we create sort of bunkering ports within the state. They would travel internationally to come to potentially Connecticut or Massachusetts, like that, regionally within New England, versus long haul trucking that for sure needs interregional cooperation between I-10, I-90 corridor or something like that. What do you think?
Yeah, we could definitely maybe separate out regional and international cooperation. Right now they're lumped together, and the logic behind putting marine shipping in that category was, yes, Connecticut could sort of unilaterally develop these sorts of fueling opportunities at ports in the state, but a hydrogen or even an ammonia-powered ship that's refueling at Connecticut would need to have infrastructure in some other country or its next destination in order to effectively, refuel at its next destination point. And other states have attempted to address this sort of challenge by developing things like green shipping corridors between, for example, the Port of LA and the Port of Shanghai, basically developing concentrated infrastructure on major shipping routes. And so the reason why marine shipping is included in this sort of cooperative dynamic is because the development of that particular market would definitely be facilitated if Connecticut were able to interlink the development of localized infrastructure at its ports with the development of similar infrastructure at other ports. Does that kind of answer your question, Diganto?
Yeah, I just wanted to some way articulate, for the example you just gave for Los Angeles and Shanghai, that's two regions that need to coordinate, versus long haul trucking, which would be every state in US needs to coordinate for long haul trucking, hydrogen-based trucking to work. I mean, it's just a much bigger amplitude of work, and that's not showing up here. Really, I think marine shipping for liquid ammonia is a very viable thing between one port of, say, Connecticut and one port in, say, Germany, coordinating with each other. What do you think, Joel?
Well, I think you're raising some good points, and just so that we don't recreate the wheel here, we actually did have conversations with the shipping industry to begin, or at least consider replicating some of the work that was going on at the port of Long Beach, LA. And that is where California created its hydrogen hub ports. And they pretty much had the market power to say every port that they selected, I can't remember how many there were, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them, something like that. But they pretty much came out and said, air quality, severely constrained, California, you can't come in to California with a ship and not go on to cold ironing and use zero emission drayage and port movement. And it was funded by California. So it worked. We talked to some of the shipping in Connecticut, and very nicely said, we're not going to do cold ironing. Does everybody know what cold ironing is? You plug the ship in. When the ship comes in, you plug in to a zero emission power source. You don't let the engines idle for ship power. But the shipping industry said in no uncertain terms, we're not going to do it. And when they were now this is a few years ago, but then when faced with the consequence of, well, what if the state of Connecticut requires zero emission power for the ships at our 3 ports, Bridgeport, New Haven, New London. And that they just couldn't idle these international ships, running on number 6 bunker. Their answer was, we'll seek to go to a different port. So at that point, I became really concerned that we were going to become anti-productive, and that we're going to be driving away some of the fleets, some of the shipping out of Connecticut. And this was on the heels of Turbana moving out of Bridgeport and going down to Baltimore. So it became problematic. Does Connecticut have the market power to impose its will on international shipping? I don't think so, unless there is international agreement and we become part of it. But we're going to have a hard time driving.
Or, yeah, Joel, I wasn't thinking of a mandate. I was thinking of some kind of a subsidy for them to come and, in fact, attract more of those green ships.
We threw it out in front of them, and they said we don't want to cold iron. They said we'd rather run our engines. We can get number 6 from international fueling. And if faced with anything that increases their cost, they were out of here. Now, would they do it? I don't know. Now the ferries are a different matter. And the ferries, they go back and forth. They've expressed interest, and I'm not speaking for them. I'm not saying that the Bridgeport to Port Jet ferries and some of the I'll call them the shorter haul shipping, where they would go from point to point, known points, have expressed, at least to me, some interest in alternative fuels, zero emission fuels, as long as it was made available. So, for example, the New London, Long Island, and the Bridgeport to Port Jeff ferries, they've expressed interest to learn more. They haven't said yes, they haven't said no. And that's because they go back and forth. They need a place to fuel. If someone were made available to them, clean fueling at low cost, no cost, or some kind of incentive, they might be interested. The other thing we brought up here was the trucking. I've talked directly with Nicola, who's setting up the long haul trucking routes. Would there be interest in the Connecticut market to have a hydrogen refueling station for a trucking hub that would go to another regional trucking hub. And this would be, what you normally think about, New York to LA, something like that. And not too long ago, they suggested that Connecticut wouldn't be on their priority list. So if we were to do something with long haul trucking and have trucking as a priority, one, there would have to be some kind of incentive or purchase or provision of the hydrogen refueling for the trucks. Two, we'd have to have some kind of an agreement for the trucks to be operated out of a particular location in Connecticut. And there'd have to be some kind of agreement to, have the trucks in service, in operation. Connecticut has 2 refueling stations right now, and both of them are waiting for a market. They're both essentially waiting to begin operation to have vehicles come in. And there is some interest to move from the light duty passenger vehicles, which are well served now by battery electric technology, to longer duration fleet vehicles and trucking, but it's not quite there yet. I mean, and maybe Andrea from Toyota has got some information on, if and when the trucking fleets might be interested in the Connecticut market. But right now we're waiting to see if that market develops. And I guess I say this as, is this the priority we want? Not quite sure it's ready for prime time.
Hi, Joel.
Andrea,
Thanks.
Andrea, if you're on, what's your thought on this?
Yeah, I have to admit I've been multitasking a little bit, but I caught the end of your comment. Toyota is currently considering how and where to expand both light duty and heavy duty. But they are entertaining the pull system. So if there are customers that are interested in adopting fuel cell heavy duty trucks, I encourage them to contact us. If you want to contact me or you want to contact Joel and he'll put you in contact with me, I'll get you to the right people and they can kind of include you in their consideration. And I can't guarantee that they'll expand to Connecticut next, but I know that this is currently the time that they're considering where to expand. Did that answer your question, Joel?
Yes, that's, I mean, that's the chicken and egg. Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah, the customers and the suppliers. It's chicken and egg.
Excellent. Well, that's great discussion. Thank you, Joel and Andrea, for your insights. And Diganto, to your point, yes, I do see, that there is certainly ways to break up the level of cooperation more than just, one blanket category. And so we can work on refining that so that it's more clear that some use cases take more cooperation and coordination than others.
Thanks.
So Colin, another quick comment is on aviation. I like the notion of being engaged in this, but really for more focused reason of manufacturing. I know our friends over at Pratt & Whitney, Raytheon Pratt & Whitney, are working on hydrogen turbines, maybe engines also, but I know they're working on hydrogen turbines. I don't know if I would prioritize this as a use. I would look at this as prioritize it for manufacturing or R&D for hydrogen fueled aviation to serve global markets. So I don't have a problem with providing incentives to engage our manufacturing supply chain to make the technology. And if that technology were to be used by other folks to serve global markets, I'm very, very good with that. But once again, I think we should be very careful about branding some of these users as highest priority when it's really a function of the market. For example, we've got a world, a global manufacturer of helicopters in Connecticut, Sikorsky Aircraft. But we don't have a state of Connecticut helicopter fleet, and nor would I recommend one. But certainly, we'd like to see that kind of technology refined, with other of our manufacturing entities to serve global markets.
Thanks for that comment, Joel. And yes, I think, we definitely want to keep economic opportunities from manufacturing for some of these sectors in view as well. I'll also just point out for aviation, that use case includes not just plane powered directly by hydrogen via fuel cells, but also planes powered with sustainable aviation fuel that's created from synthesizing hydrogen into e-kerosene. And so there's opportunities to develop potentially both of those industries within Connecticut for service of local and global markets.
Yeah, let me make that even a little bit more complicated. So, we do have some of the R&D in Connecticut that is providing both hydrogen-fueled drones and other experimental aircraft, including some of the Mars missions. So this is all part of the manufacturing base. And what's the other one? It's also the technology. If there's a flame out on the engines, what would be the aircraft power to restart? There's technology that's being developed in Connecticut, and some of that's being considered as fuel cell, hydrogen fuel cell for restart capability of the turbines, which is required as a fail-safe for some of the commercial airlines. So there's a lot of aircraft. So there's a lot of things out there, but a lot of this is maybe tied to manufacturing, in addition to global use. The question is, will Connecticut be part of the market? We're going to have a hard time driving the market, but if the market does come, I would be in agreement. We want to provide the infrastructure so that it is supported.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And yeah, thanks for raising awareness for additional end users as well. So in the interest of time, I'm going to continue moving forward to the next slide, which looks at high priority use cases for additional investigation. These are end uses that also have potentially very strong economics for hydrogen, but are generally smaller scale. And so we don't necessarily have the same level of environmental or economic benefits if hydrogen begins to be used in these sectors en masse. So some of these examples, long distance buses, ferries, freight rail, and then specific fleet vehicles with operational parameters that are particularly suitable for hydrogen. All of these end uses are potentially strategic end uses to develop, and may even facilitate the development of a market for hydrogen as larger scale applications like long haul trucking before those sectors begin to switch over to hydrogen at scale. And so there's an opportunity to coordinate development of these sectors, potentially with the development of other opportunities in the highest priority end use sectors. And so there's a great deal of symbiosis between some of these end uses potentially and the end uses that were just discussed. This bucket also includes end uses where there's evidence suggesting hydrogen could be an economic decarbonization option, but where technical demonstrations are needed. This includes things like hydrogen blending in natural gas pipelines for non-core customers, such as power generation, industrial heat, which I'll address in more detail later in the slides. But again, I've developed or put some context here in terms of which end uses would require regional or international cooperation, which might require state-specific policy support. And as a general sort of framework or takeaway, these high priority use cases are great opportunities potentially for state-supported pilots and demonstration projects. As discussed earlier, there's opportunities to incorporate these end uses and sort of market development tool and in coordination with some of the other end uses that were discussed as highest priority. And so I want to specify that these aren't necessarily, not something the state should look at, but they're not identified as highest priority simply because they're ultimately smaller scale and over the long term would have a smaller impact if they were transitioned than some of the other end uses that were discussed. So moving on to
Colin,
the
I had a
next slide.
couple of clarifying questions on the preceding slide.
This one?
No, sorry, the one you were just on.
Yep.
The
Sorry,
high
who is this?
priority.
I'm not able to see in my screen.
Yeah, this is right. I was wondering, could you specify what exactly is meant by long distance buses? And then secondly, if you have specific examples of which types of fleet vehicles you had in mind?
Definitely. So long distance buses would be sort of intercity buses, think like Greyhounds running from like New York to Boston or something like that. And for fleet vehicles with long uptimes and specific fueling locations, this could be things like police cruisers that have to be operational for a very long period of time and refuel at the police station, or ambulances that have a similar sort of operational need. That help answer your questions?
Yes, it did. I think it would also be helpful in thinking about like more specifically what you mean with the long distance buses, like in terms of mileage. That was helpful, but a little bit more specificity I think could also be helpful.
That makes a ton of sense. So, for the long haul trucking, we were looking at ranges of 400 miles or more being sort of the long haul trucking, being sort of the threshold. And so I imagine we'd be looking at something similar for buses.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yep, no problem.
Colin, it's Sarah. So that would essentially be like infrastructure that doesn't make sense to electrify because you can't go the whole distance on a single charge, or you can't have the downtime required to charge it in the example of an ambulance.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, if there are any other questions, please let me know. But otherwise, I'll move on to the next slide. Where we're talking about other valuable applications that were identified. These end uses are situations or applications where hydrogen has value as a decarbonization tool, but where the economics, based on our review of the literature, did not allow us to clearly choose, determine that hydrogen was the optimal option compared to other decarbonization technologies like electrification. So these are opportunities where policymakers should keep these in view, but not we didn't have the justification to prioritize them, and unless systems level analysis in the future determines that hydrogen is the lowest cost option for Connecticut specifically. And so these are areas where there's potential opportunities for technology neutral policy support. Subsidies that support like low and zero, for example, for buses, zero emission buses would be an area where policy support could play a significant role. And an additional study to determine, when thinking about how to decarbonize these end uses, which type of decarbonization route is most optimal, taking into account a comprehensive look at, fueling needs, infrastructure needs for hydrogen versus electrification, and the specific situation that Connecticut faces for each of these opportunities. And so, not opportunities that are still being looked at, but are really an area where additional study might be needed.
A hand from Shannon.
Go ahead, Shannon.
Yeah, thank you. I think this has been raised previously, but just wanted to flag the framing on this slide. I think this is potentially problematic. I think the descriptions here make sense, but by calling these other valuable applications when we're really flagging them as the lowest priority, I think is potentially misleading and could be confusing to policymakers. So I think once you dive into the details, that's not so much of an issue, but I think calling them other valuable applications could be a little bit confusing to legislators and other policymakers. So we might want to reconsider that.
Thanks, that's good feedback.
And then Lydia.
Hi, and thanks, Shannon, for already flagging this. This was one of the things I was going to say. Maybe one possibility is renaming to other potential valuable applications, or maybe coming up with another name that doesn't give this strong sense of this. We already kind of think that it's valuable, since it may or may not be valuable for Connecticut. So thanks for that. The other two, well, it's actually one comment or recommendation that I have. I already flagged this to Colin via email, but I'm going to bring this also here in the meeting, and we'll be writing in the response for the request for reading comments. I believe that the commuter buses and also the heavy duty trucks with lower daily driving ranges may not be very accurate to put in this bucket. It is different. They are different than if we are thinking about, for instance, blending hydrogen for core customers. And if you think the commuter buses, they are driving a short distance, but they are driving the whole day. And maybe using batteries, electrifying them would be hard, not only because of the heavy weight that would impose for them. Of course, it's lighter than those very heavy duty trucks, but it's still heavy. But also the number of recharges that are necessary may also be some kind of a challenge, and hydrogen in this respect could be an opportunity or a nice complement to the electrification. So in my view, at least, it would be more appropriate to put this the commuter buses in the second bucket, the high priority. And regarding the heavy trucks, even for those that are driving those lower ranges, the main problem with them is the technology itself. It's actually using the batteries, one of the main problems to the electrification. So even though they are driving lower distances, they still have this technical very big challenge. So I think they end up being the same as heavy trucks that are driving for longer distance. So I would recommend to put this at least on the high priority. My personal view is that they would be in the first one, along with the other heavy duty trucks. But I definitely don't see those two potential uses as in this third bucket of the potential valuable applications. I think they are very much different from the others. that's just the recommendations that we have here from DIC.
Yeah, I'd support those comments by Lydia, and that is, I think we're setting this thing up as a low priority. I mean, I know we're calling it other valuable applications, but in terms of the commuter buses, I'd call that an urban application. I think it's a valuable application to reduce emissions in urban communities, which is one of the focal points of the hydrogen hub. The technology is available, and the federal funding is available for 90% of the cost. So here's a nice opportunity to have zero emission buses in urban communities that I think would find value in the clean air. Moreover, the hydrogen fueled buses, one, the technology is available, but it also provides fuel diversity. We don't need to challenge our transportation system all on one fuel, electricity. If we're looking at zero emission buses, if for whatever reason during a storm outage or whatever, the grid goes down, then our transportation system goes also. Fuel diversity has some value, hence, for certain applications, i.e. buses, I like the idea of having this as a higher priority.
Hey, go ahead, Joe.
And I know we've got the hydrogen blending in both the middle and this last column, but per my comments that I made at the last meeting, hydrogen blending, we know other folks are doing it right now. And if there is surplus energy coming from a renewable energy source, surplus energy coming from the offshore wind, we can either ask the offshore wind to curtail, which economically is disastrous, knowing the margins are pretty thin right now, and or they can make hydrogen. Financially, economically, it works when it's low cost hydrogen off peak during on peak production. And with the blending, it's not an all or nothing proposition. You can begin decarbonization with 1%, 3%, 5%, and use the existing infrastructure, which is also in the hydrogen legislation, use of existing infrastructure to avoid stranded investment. So it's not perfect, but it meets the criteria that's in the federal infrastructure bill, which I think we ought to be syncing up with. Plus, and I see Deganto is on here. I think there's an opportunity to work directly with the utilities to manage some of the blending, and also keeping in mind the natural gas system. Folks are going to be saying, "Jesus, it's safe." What do we do about leakage? What are we doing about detection? All those things need to be refined. But it wasn't too long ago that the gas systems were run by Town Gas, and they were running 50% hydrogen. So this isn't science fiction. This is an opportunity to begin incremental decarbonization of the system. I'm sorry, Deganto, you look like you wanted to jump in on this, and I'd like to hear your views on this also.
Yeah, no, I just I think you mentioned an important point in the beginning, Colin. I just wanted to make sure that you capture that there may be. I mean, ultimately, I thought why you were prioritizing these is because you were going to then go knee deep in the supply demand incentives needed to effectuate a sustainable path forward for those specific applications. And I think in that equation, Joel just mentioned about the commuter buses. I don't know if this is true or not. I'm going to take Joel for his word for it. that if 90% of that funding is already coming from federal funding, then I think we should do our best to see if we can supplement that as needed with state funding to really drive home the commercial buses. So I would second that, but I just want to make sure that it's not based on opinions of Joel's or mine or anyone else's. It should be based on that quantitative analysis of federal funding needed and available right now to be able to drive that. On the blending, and I don't know, I know we've talked about this before. I have heard anecdotally from our gas company that we can't do any more than 20%. But I don't know what that right answer is, but I was hoping that the infrastructure working group would arrive at that. And if they haven't prioritized that, I would just, push a little bit for you guys to push that other work group to make sure that we arrive at a number, whatever that number is. But philosophically, 100% aligned, Eversource would be happy to partner with wet transmission developers to bring in offshore wind. We've already proposed a couple of critical locations in Connecticut where we can bring in offshore wind, high voltage DC transmission, and pair it with electrolyzers with a significant, I don't want to get into the details of how many tons per day of hydrogen production. And when that gets produced, whether it's directly tied to surplus energy and curtailment or on an ongoing basis based on just market economics of wholesale LNPs at those nodes, Eversource is 100% behind it. Where I get a little bit dicey on is, okay, what do we do then? Do we store it in a cryogenic tank on site, or do we immediately pipe it with either dedicated pipes, which would be my personal preference, but to the extent we can blend it in the existing pipelines, we just need to know from this working group, between the three working groups, what is that? What does that look like? What is that demand on that hydrogen? Would be super helpful. Just assume a 20 megawatt to 30 megawatt electrolyzer just assume that the supply is not a constraint. I want to get down to what the demand is on the existing pipeline. How much can we push?
I think those are terrific comments, and I fully support that. And I'm hoping Enrique can come on and set us straight one way or the other, or help us out.
I fully agree with Giganto and also with you, Joel. From our perspective, the commuter buses is a fantastic use. Couple of things about this use. It's a very replicable solution. So you can develop the solution in one city and then duplicate the solution to another city. So in that terms, it's very easy to implement once you got one facility there. The other thing I like about it is that it's like a relatively small investment application when you are talking with commuter buses. So that is going to give you also a sense of risk assessment that you can leverage or manage with this kind of investments. So it's not like going from 0 to 100 in 1 year. So you can do a plan to be implementing buses with hydrogen. This is one of the things, for example, that Iberdrola, the parent company, is doing in Barcelona. Great experience, direct application, replicable solution. That's why I think it's an important use for the our location here. I totally agree with the comments about blending. So I think we should be open to that consideration, especially with the offshore coming and all those megawatts. So fully agree on that too.
I agree with those comments.
And by the way, the commuter buses, we also study with electric buses, and it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense to do the commuter buses hydrogen, because maybe electric buses make more sense for school buses because of the schedule and the kind of operation they have. But for commuter buses, for the time of charging, I mean, at the end of the day, you're gonna need something to be charged in 10, 15 minutes, and that's something that hydrogen can do. So it's that's one of the use that we think it's a go for sure, right?
Thanks, everyone. A lot of great feedback here. Want to make sure that everyone else has a chance to weigh in on any of the use cases discussed before moving on. So let me give a chance for anyone else to raise their hand or speak up with their own comments.
And Colin, can you mention the comment opportunity that we have open now too?
Yes. So I recognizing how our shortage of time, there is also an opportunity to submit written comments, which will all be considered in the process. And so want to make sure everyone is aware of that opportunity. But I see that Ben has his hand raised and would like to give him a chance to speak as well. He's waiting.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. So my comment's actually kind of related more to the next slide. I was looking at the deck that you circulated around the sort of deep dive on hydrogen blending slide. And I guess I'm having trouble kind of wrapping my head around this. That first bullet saying, you know, end uses for hydrogen blending, describe areas of focus for blending efforts, not necessarily the customers that will be receiving the hydrogen. So in my view, the customer segments that are actually receiving the hydrogen is the critical distinction if we're talking about end uses and priorities. It was mentioned previously that the sort of non-core customers are in the, what is it called, the higher priority, and the blending for core customers is in, you know, the other valuable applications grouping. But I'm looking at that kind of second set of bullets, and you know, to me, the on-site blending directly feeding the customers isolated from the main gas network, that's a completely different animal than blending into the statewide pipeline network upstream of these customers. So I think when we're talking about blending for non-core customers, we really have to distinguish which of those two bullets we're talking about, right? Are we talking about targeted blending that only reaches those non-core customers? Or are we talking about system-wide blending that reaches all customer types? Because to the first bullet, you know, regardless of what the kind of intent of the action is, right? The actual end result is for blending into the entire distribution system is that, you know, residential and commercial customers as well as the non-core customers are receiving hydrogen. And, you know, there's a number of downsides to that I don't necessarily have to get into in detail. But I think, you know, if we're talking about a non-core customer blending approach that blends the hydrogen to both residential and commercial customers, to me, that's definitely a lower priority use of hydrogen in Connecticut, since we are kind of, it is in essence blending to core and non-core customers simultaneously. So I just wanted to make that point. I think it's a key distinction when you're talking about non-core customer hydrogen use.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm hearing that if I'm hearing correctly, these two different ways to achieve blending for non-core customers you see as two fundamentally separate end use or use cases.
Yeah, yes, fundamentally separate, and I don't think they should be lumped into the same prioritization grouping. I think based on which of those two bullets you're picking, on-site blending or blending into the statewide pipeline network, completely different end use applications of hydrogen and should be treated very separately from a prioritization framework perspective.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you for that feedback. So in the interest of time, I know we only have 3 minutes left. I don't see any other hands up. So I'll quickly, I think we've, you know, with the last 3 minutes, I'd like to spend a little bit of time looking at potential demand, the initial demand results from some of the analysis we've conducted, which I think, to Diganja's point, will help give us a sense of, you know, the scale of demand at different points in time that we're looking at, and maybe help focus on the conversation around end uses in the future. So I'll jump ahead a couple slides, but happy to answer questions at another time offline about any of the slides that we had to skip past. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this slide, which shows the potential demand for hydrogen in the different end uses identified as highest priority over the next 3 decades. I just want to note that these are all preliminary assessments and are really designed to give a sense of magnitude of the opportunity in each end use, with the understanding that specific numbers will likely be refined as we continue our analysis and validate some of our assumptions with stakeholders in the field. But you can see power generation and long-haul trucking have the potential to scale up, particularly, well, not quickly. In 2030, demand is relatively low across most end uses, but scale up quickly, particularly in power generation and long-haul trucking in the 2040 and 2050 timeframe. Maritime and aviation are also relatively large. Critical facilities in industry, relatively small. Critical facilities because although they may be a big opportunity for fuel cell use, the nature of backup power is that it's not used so much, and actually hydrogen consumption would not likely be that high. And industry is just a reflection of the sort of allocation of economic of Connecticut's economy across different sectors, I'd say. So as a point of comparison, we're looking at demand from a couple of different sectors reaching 10 kilotons per year, 20 kilotons potentially in the example of long-haul trucks. If Connecticut were to produce hydrogen from all of the renewable energy that would otherwise be curtailed in 2030, according to ISO New England forecast, around the terawatt hours of renewable energy curtailment in that year, that energy would yield about 7 kilotons of hydrogen demand. And so we'll, at a future date, do a better job intersecting this demand use with a potential supply of hydrogen from different sources. But that's a good point of reference, I'd say, for now. Hydrogen production from excess renewable energy estimated to reach 7 kilotons maximum by 2030 and maybe 20 kilotons by 2040.
Colin, I may have missed this, but can you provide the citation for this slide?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where, because this is a significant information. So if you could get us the citation or citations, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Here's a quick overview of the methodology and references, but I can make actual citations available after this presentation as well. Also want to remind everyone again that I know we're out of time today. There is an established process to submit written comments on anything you can say, any other feedback or concerns you might have. You've already provided a great deal of feedback in this call, which I really appreciate, and we will, we have all that recorded. We'll take it back and incorporate it into our analysis and make sure that it's worked into the final reports in one form or another. Great. Well, I see we're a minute over time. I'm sorry we didn't get to go into some of the sections of the presentation in as much detail as we initially planned, but thank you all for your time, and feel free to follow up with additional questions or written comment through the established process. Thank you, and I hope everyone has a great.
Colin, just a quick comment. When you go through the methodology, if you could just clarify some of the sources, I'm not sure. Are they is it market potential for Connecticut? Is it national or is it international? I know, for example, you've got material handling. It's for Connecticut, but I'm not sure about the others. So I guess when you go through the citations and the references, try to give us an apples to apples comparison of what the loads would be.
Absolutely,
Thanks.
Joel. For reference now, all of this demand assessment was for hydrogen use in Connecticut.
Thank you.
But I'll just, yeah. All right, well, thank you all for your time, and have a great holiday.
Thanks, Colin. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
you.
Thank you, Colin. Take
Bye,
care,
all.
everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye.